it's peach season, and so I am picking up all the fresh peaches. And one of the things I love to make with them is a peach butter. It is not actual butter, it is a fruit spread with the consistency of butter. One of the oldest types of fruit spreads, and I'm gonna show you how easy it is with just a few ingredients to make this, package it, use it for yourself or gifts. Let's make some. Now, if you hear the word fruit butter, you might be thinking, where's the butter? Where's the spreadable butter? That is not what this is. Fruit butter is actually one of the first versions of a preserved fruit spread. Before jam, before preserves that we just use more as a word to describe any fruit item. Fruit butter is called fruit butter because you cook it to a consistency where it becomes a spreadable consistency and texture like soft butter. So that's why we call it fruit butter. Now, I know a lot of people think I'm trying to create a new name calling it fruit butter. I'm not. I didn't make this up. This is a very old thing, but it's one of my favorite ways to preserve because I think it's the easiest thing. So what you're gonna notice is we're working with peaches today. I've been picking lots of peaches here on the farm. I have about 3 peach trees. I live in zone 5, which some people think you can't grow peaches in. Guess what? You can. Reliance and there's Contender are 2 of my favorite peach trees to grow in my zone. And they do wonderful. The one big thing with a peach tree is you have to pick off about half the peaches every year because it usually overproduces and then it's too much for the tree. So what we're doing, these are all washed, they're all cleaned. I grow them, I know how I grow them too organically, which is nice. Now, I like to work with really ripe fruit because it has the most flavor. So that means it has literally no resistance when you're opening it up. Now, if you see a blemish on it, those I do cut out, but the skin itself I'm leaving on because there's natural pectin in that. There's more flavor, and if there's a little bruising, don't worry about that. That's okay too, but if it's a bad spot, when that wants to spoil, that I definitely get rid of. And then I just easily, when they're ripe, can pull that pit right out too. Now the reason we're leaving the skin on, like I said, it adds more flavor, but then when we're done cooking this, we're gonna make sure we get all that skin off. Now, I am someone that when I'm doing this, just because growing up I did this too, you have to try it. That is so good. That is such a good peach. Using them ripe, obviously you can't all grow them, but getting them when they're ripe and in season, which peaches usually you can only get in season, that flavor. Now, a true fruit butter, you don't have to always use sugar with. You can cook down that fruit and just get it really thick. I'm gonna tell you though why I use some sugar, and I use a lot less sugar than original. So original recipes for fruit butter are usually equal parts of pounds of the fruit to cups of sugar. So if it's 4 pounds, it'd be 4 cups of sugar. I'm not doing that. I am doing some sugar because guess what? Sugar is a preservative also. Yes, it adds sweetness. Yes, it can bring out some flavor. But do you know what sugar also does? It keeps the color longer and keeps it in the jar better longer. So that's a reason I do add some sugar. I think it's really important to do that. Along with that, we're gonna be adding some lemon juice. So lemon juice, again, it's the acidity we need when we're canning this, but it also balances out the sweetness of just the natural peaches themselves. And it's a really needed byproduct here to have this lemon juice in there. Not only will it brighten everything up, which it does, but it also makes sure that you get the correct consistency and the preservation is better too. So lemon juice is really important. So those 2 things, lemon juice and sugar, I'm using for both important reasons. Now, if you do one without any sugar, because you can do that, you want to cook it down, obviously still with lemon juice. But over time, after a few months, even in the jar, it can start to darken. I got a couple little seeds in there I want to get out. And you don't want it to darken down in when it's in the jar and sitting on your shelf, because this can be shelf stable. I'll show you how to do it if you don't want to have to can it either. So this is everything that goes in here. We have the peaches, we have some sugar, and we have some lemon juice. Now, all we do at this point, this is why I love this method, is we're gonna cook it. We're gonna take this over. I have a heavy bottomed piece to actually cook this in. That's gonna make sure I evenly distribute the heat, but also that it doesn't burn or stick. So we're gonna put this on, we're gonna turn it on, and we're gonna just start stirring it until it just starts cooking, and then we're gonna let it come to a rolling boil. The peaches have come up to a boil, but I wanna show you the difference between just a boil and a rolling boil. So when you're making a fruit butter, you want it to come to a rolling boil, which not only is it gonna be boiling all throughout, but as you stir it, you should be able to keep that boil. See how it continues to boil? If it's at a lower boil, when you stir it, it will stop boiling and take a little bit to come back. This takes no time to come back, meaning it's at a rolling boil. So I'm going to adjust it and just keep watching the heat, but now I'm gonna time it And all it takes is 20 minutes at this rolling boil until it's ready to go. So if any of this foam comes to the top while it's at this boil, some of this foam, I will skim that off and discard that or just kind of separate it. Other than that, I'm just gonna let it cook. So this has been boiling, and I want to show you here at the end. See how it still is boiling, but you don't want to keep it at that hard boil, just a continual nice boil. And you can see it actually does cook down. Now, if you cook it down too much, it'll be way too thick. The big important thing to remember with any fruit butter, fruit preserve, when it's hot, it's much thinner and runnier. As it cools, it becomes thicker. So once it's fully cooled or chilled, it's at its true thickness. So now at this point, we want to run it through either a food mill, which is just something like this that you put a strainer in the bottom and you turn it and push it through. Or I use a conical strainer because this is what I grew up with. So we use it only for canning and different things, but you put everything in here. You have a pounder that you just push around, and it will make sure that we don't have all those kind of tenuous skins in there. It will leave them out, and it will give us that smooth texture that is a true fruit butter. So what I'm gonna do is just take scoops of this, and I just think you could pour it in, but let's be honest, with my messiness, that's not gonna work. So I'm gonna pour it right into here. And then what we do is we take this pounder. Now, if you're using a food mill, it's a little different, but you're gonna take this in here. We're just gonna start pushing this through. And what's gonna happen is all those peaches are gonna be forced to go through the strainer, which, like I said, at first it's gonna look thin. Do not lose heart. It does become thicker as it cools and as we get all those peach pieces through. You can see I've pushed it pretty much all the way through, which is just a nice consistency, and it's a pretty color too. So if you want to know what it's like when it's going to be chilled, you put a plate in the freezer. This plate has been in the freezer, obviously. And you let it sit on that plate for a few seconds. And while it's doing that, what it's doing is quickly chilling down a small amount of the butter. You can do this with any preserved butter, fruit spread that you make. And then what you can start telling is, look, as it chills, then look how slowly it falls because it gets such a nice thick consistency. It tastes really good too. So what I do, just to show you how this finished up, I push this through until it's a very dry material on it, and obviously you can't push more. Now my strainer has a place where I can turn it like this, and it gets all that excess off the outside. But then this I will now discard, because that's gonna be pieces of, that skin that kind of is more stringy or tenuous, and you don't want that. So I'll discard that and anything that's left, but any of the bits on the outside that worked their way through, that's good, and that's good peach flavor that you want. So that part I'm using. But now what we need to do, anytime you're canning, it's just canning now, kind of a little bit 101, which if you don't want to can this, that's okay, I'm not gonna force you. But if you do want to, you want it to be hot when you can something. So this has cooled down slightly because we pushed it through. So what I wanna do is add it back. I slightly cleaned up, not perfectly, but I kind of cleaned up the kettle. And I'm just gonna bring this back to a nice simmer, just to make sure it's hot. My jars then will be hot after I sterilize them, and then we'll go through and we'll just start assembling them, and we'll water bath it. The fruit butter came to a nice simmer and made sure it was hot all the way throughout. And now I've just been using it and putting it right into the jars that were sterilized. Now, canning 101, you sterilize jars. You have your water bath ready that has a rack on the bottom so the jars don't touch the bottom. Sterilize them in that water for 5 minutes. Then I bring them out. Now, there are different ways and different people do it different ways. I try to follow all the USDA guidelines, so always check with the USDA canning guide if you have questions, because that's gonna be best to know how you adjust for elevation, because yes, you do adjust for elevation, and different things like that. So as you can see, I'm putting them right up, and I do have enough for another one here yet. And what I do is once that's done, I take I use a paper towel, and I take it with some hot water and I run it around the rim to make sure there are no drips. Now what we're working with does not have air bubbles because it's not that thick, but if there would be something you're making that would have air bubbles, those you want to make sure you get out. You don't want air bubbles in whatever you're canning. This fruit preserve, this fruit butter, you do not have to worry about that with, which is nice. So what I am doing though is making sure I put it right in the jar, which this one won't get quite full enough, so I'm gonna save this one and just put it in the fridge. And that's fine because then I have one I can use. So I'm gonna put this last lid on, which my lids were ready, just following the instructions on the box. And I put the ring on. Now every year my jars get reused. So when I use this and put it in the fridge while I'm using it, when it's done, I wash the jar, put it in my basement, and then the next year I use the same jars. So every year I just buy lids, use the same rings. They eventually get a little rusty, but As long as they're not too rusty, you can use them. Now always check your jars though, inspect them, make sure there's no chips on them or anything like that. Now what we can do is take them over to the water bath that's ready. That's how simple it is. Now if you don't want to do this, say you don't want to can it, that's completely fine. You can put this actually in the freezer in small containers or even in the fridge, and it will keep for months in the fridge, and it will keep for even double that probably in the freezer. What I'm gonna do now is use a jar lifter, and this is how you make sure that you don't touch the boiling water. You don't just wanna set them in without that. And we wanna make sure our hot water is gonna cover them by at least an inch, which I know it will. So, because I've done this enough that I know how much water I need to put in, and that's what the thing is with canning. You start getting into a rhythm with it, you'll start becoming more comfortable, and that's the whole point. So I put them all in. Once it's boiling, I'm gonna start timing it, and then in a few minutes, they're gonna be done. I took these out, and honestly, within the first 3 minutes of being outside the canner, they have all popped, which is such a good noise. And that means that those lids that were on top, they invert down and they pop, meaning all the air is suctioned out and you have a good seal. So now I let these go for, if you're gonna seal them like this, I let them go for about 24 hours or 12 hours just to sit, cool off completely. Then I will remove the lid rings, check to make sure it's a real seal. Now you always see pictures where this ring is left on, and then when I remove them, people are like, why do you remove them? That can be a false seal. I like to remove those and I store them without the rings because that seal should be good without it. If that ring is the only thing holding that lid on, that's not a good seal. So obviously I haven't really chilled it yet. I do have a little bit left, but look at the beautiful color. I want you to see how that pretty color is. And right now it's not chilled, so it's gonna be a little thinner, but look at that beautiful consistency. It's smooth, and it tastes like fresh peaches. That's really the point. So of course you can just use this on top of toast. It's really good on oatmeal, on yogurt. I buy no sugar added, just Greek yogurt. Stir this into it, pour it on top. You know, it's really good also, if you just want to be a little bit more decadent, on ice cream. I will use this in my peach crumb bars, which is on my website. I love that recipe. So there's so many ways to use a good fruit preserve, but also the best Christmas gift ever right here. Give this to a friend, put a bow on it, something homemade, something you can use from the heart. That's really the point. So that's what these videos are about, showing you that it can be done to find something really good out of peaches, out of something that's in season, making a small batch, just a few jars. It doesn't take as much time as you think. It's pretty simple, but honestly, the flavor, the fun you can have, hopefully it will bring people together. Do it with your family, do it with friends. That's the point of canning, is to try something new, but also make something for yourself. So share this video around so other people can see that too, and check my website, wiseguy.com, for this recipe, for this process, but also for other recipes like those peach crumb bars, because believe me, you're gonna want to be making them. So hope you try it.